Well, welcome everybody. This is the second vodcast of Los Trios Psychologists. May I welcome Michael Carr-Gregg to the video phone.
Great to be here.
And also we have Joe Mitchell with us. Welcome to you, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Right. So guys, we're going to talk today about apps. The world has been taken over by apps since, I guess the iPhone was first released in 2007, which really began this modern era of apps. Apps made by developers didn't really come out until about 2009, and Apple originally didn't want apps to come out onto the market, thought it could control the marketplace. But I think in hindsight they're very grateful they let go, because this is what has really made the iPhone, if you like, Apple's own dominant business. And of course, in its own way, Apple's become a dominant business in terms of technologies. And only in the last couple of years have we seen this transition from people accessing knowledge on the internet via apps directly than via websites in particular. That means a very great change in the way people think about apps, and no greater, I think, the change has been in the field of mental health. So let me get your views, just as a general overview, if I can, about where you see the world of apps going in terms of mental health, Michael.
Well, first of all, I think there are a lot of apps out there, and it's very confusing for a lot of psychologists and their clients to know which are okay and which are not. So this is where the mobile app rating scale, developed in association with the Young and Well CRC and QUT, comes in. So this is the first time we've actually been able to have kind of empirical way of assessing which apps are good and which are not. So that's an important start. Two other things about that. One is I'm actually finding that a lot of my clients bring me apps. In fact, the first app that was ever brought to me was one called I Cope, which is an app for self-harm. Now, it was developed by some British mental health nurses, and frankly I found it terrifying. I don't use it clinically anymore, and I'm not sure that I'd recommend it to anyone, largely because there's simply no RCT, there's no evidence that it works, and there's a sneaking suspicion as a clinician that I worry that it might cause harm.
Okay, so Joe, in your world, can I ask you about this point of Michael saying that any of your clients are bringing new apps, or is it more a one-way street, you to them?
No, absolutely. So clients will talk about the things that they use, and I try to incorporate that, because if they're already using something, as long as it's not doing harm, as Michael mentioned, then they're more likely to actually use those. So let's incorporate it.
So can we say then that if we were to do this show a few years ago, it would have been a one-way street the other way, that we would have been bringing, those of us who are into this, would have been bringing our clients news of apps. Would you like to try this? The field is now mature to such a degree that they are coming to us and saying, what do you think about this app? Or I've been using this app for a while, and do you think it's a good one? It does remind me of, in fact, nothing new here, that patients or clients were doing this with self-help literature and handouts and other things that they found years ago. But things are a little bit different now, but along the same way, if I can say that. Michael?
Yeah, I think that is a major shift, and I think that it behooves psychologists to actually only recommend apps that have an evidence base, number one, but also be open to the fact that your clients brought you an app that may in fact work well for them, and you have to be open to that. And I think that's the change for psychologists.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you both a tricky question, because Michael, you're talking about the app has to have an evidence base, but can I suggest to you that many of us in private practice or in independent practice or in research for that matter, we're not in a position to wait 5 years for this research to come down, because the data shows us that it takes years of the formal gold standard studies for that data to reach private practice. And this field is moving so fast. Isn't there a place for a well-trained psychologist, mental health worker to make their own assessment? Yes, taking into account some of the RCTs, as you were talking, the random, but at the same time working through saying, this fits my model very well. And indeed, let me go one stage further. I've said that one of the criteria, or some of the criteria for selecting an app, is not just that it has an evidence base to it, but in fact there's an ease of use base to it, so that patients or clients find it easy to use, that it doesn't have lots of interferences. That is, I can't be bothered using this, and it actually cuts down work for both patient and clinician. Isn't that another criteria that doesn't get tested in randomised control studies, Michael?
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. And I think one of the things you just have to be careful of is that you don't try and put this app forward as something that does have an evidence base, but you need to talk about its limitations, but acknowledge that it works well for you. A really good example for this is the Smiling Mind app. We know mindfulness has an evidence base, but we're not sure yet whether using mindfulness through an app has the same efficacy. However, that's not stopped 1 million people from downloading the Smiling Mind app. What are you going to do? Say don't use it? Clearly you're quite right. Quite right.
Jo, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think sometimes the apps that I might use with people haven't necessarily been purpose-built for mental health. So I'll give you a fairly silly example of one that gets used sometimes that fits with the framework. So in doing diffusion techniques, so using an ACT model, and
let's expand what ACT is.
Okay, so ACT, acceptance, commitment, therapy. So in using that framework to work with clients, and you're looking for ways to help them diffuse or unhook from unhelpful stories or thoughts. Now, there's an app out there that people are probably used to using with their kids, which is Talking Tom. And it's a cute little cat that you speak to, and he'll speak back to you in Talking Tom voice. And sometimes, with the right clients, getting them to repeat their story to Talking Tom and get him in his silly voice to say it back to them is actually a really helpful tool in session to help people unhook. So that's not built for, clinical purposes per se, but I think it can help us in a session. And there's certainly not going to be any RCT done on it.
So this is an opportunity for some really innovative use of existing applications and repurposing it for psychological purposes.
Just
Michael,
like the one that you taught me about, Les Posen, which was Focus Up Pro.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that? Because I think it's really useful.
So let's make a mention of this if I can. I learnt about this app from a couple of sports and rehabilitation psychologists at the American Psychological Association meeting, a workshop I attended on mobile apps in 2013 in Honolulu. Couldn't think of a worse place to go for a conference, to tell you the truth. I mean, really, something shocking. Anyway, so pre-conference workshop, and these were two people from Utah, would you believe, and they brought along their iPad minis for everyone in the workshop. They already had the apps there, and one of them they chose to show us was Focus Up Pro. And because they were rehabilitative psychologists working with elite athletes recovering, but with elite athletes in general, this app has its origins in Russia, in sort of the druggy kind of athletic Russia, to help athletes deal with their arousal and invasive thoughts and performance anxiety, especially for those events where it's not a contact sport, it's like golf or high diving, or where it's totally up to you to do your best performance. You have to really, so they visualize it, yes. So we're just showing now, Michael, what it looks like. And so the idea is for people to touch numbers between 1 and 16 in order. If you recall Daniel Kahneman's work, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, but basically behavioral economics, he talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking, or fast and slow thinking. So really overused things that we don't have to learn about. Counting to 16 is a really overused thing. So if I say to you, what comes after 13? You access that information immediately. If I say to you, Jo, 2 times 2?
4.
4 times 4?
16.
44 times 44?
No idea.
No idea. So we don't have to teach Jo multiplication, but because 2 times 2 and 4 times 4 is just something you use every day, it's what Kahneman would say is system 1 thinking. You don't have to think about it anymore. Think about driving a car and how it used to be when you first learned so many things to coordinate, and now you don't even remember how you got into 5th gear if you drive a manual. System 2 thinking is that slow, ponderous, how's it working out? So Focus Up Pro combines system 1, system 2. System 1, count to 16. System 2, it's moving around all the time. And what's really interesting is when I ask my patients, think of that awful catastrophizing thought that really upsets you. Fear of flying, what's that noise, the plane's going to fall, I can't stand this. We've all heard these sort of appraisals of danger. And I say to my patients, keep going with it. really go to town, really get yourself, I want your heart rate to increase, and we can measure this, of course, and just see that they're getting worked up, and say, okay, now play the game. The game may only last between 8 to 20 seconds, depending on the difficulty level of the game. And then I ask, what happened to your thought? And they look at me and they go, what thought? It's gone. And then I say, bring back the thought for a moment. And they bring back the thought, and guess what? The thought comes back, but what happens to its emotional power? Much diminished. And patients look at you and say, it's that easy. And I go, well, there's more to it, but you get the idea now. And it's a wonderful example of the system 1, system 2 kind of thinking. Do you like it? It's Focus Up Pro.
I have been using Focus Up Pro since you told me about it, and I've been using it with anxious, I only see teenagers, but I'm using it with anxious teenagers who love it. And just to correct you, it doesn't just go up to 16. The more you do it, and these kids are really good at it, you can actually end up with up to 50 or 64 numbers in this grid. So it's really quite a thing, and they love to compete, of course, to get better and better and better at it. And of course you can't have unhelpful, distorted thinking at the same time. It's a really fantastic therapeutic tool. And can I just say that I also use it in association with an app called eSense, which is something that I stick on the young people's fingers at the same time so they can get direct biofeedback in terms of galvanic skin response. And again, same thing as Les, they just absolutely, their levels of arousal drop incredibly. And the other thing I'm using now is this. It's an app called the PIP. This is a galvanic skin response as well. You simply put your fingers on either side and it basically rates your level of arousal on an iPhone, iPad, or whatever you want. The number of biofeedback devices that are now cheap, under $300 on the market, which should, I think, be used by all psychologists, is extraordinary.
So just hold up your left wrist, Michael, to the camera and show them the phone. Okay, so we think that the wearable device market is going to go ballistic in the next year to 2 years as the prices drop.
Yep.
And as more apps roll out that will measure exactly what we're talking about, arousal levels and heart rate. Now, Joe, one of the things with Focus Up Pro and these apps is the idea that with many people, we ought not to be aiming necessarily for a calm state, but for a focused state. It's all about attention. Is that what you think is going on too?
I think it depends on what people are presenting with, what you're looking for to really bring out in them. But yeah, absolutely, we're looking a lot of the time at attention, but attention regulation in different ways, which is where the mindfulness apps can be helpful. But even still, the thing I find interesting about them is that I think that there's a lot of room for innovation in the mindfulness apps that are on the market, in that they tend to use meditation as their key form of encouraging mindful attention. I think there's probably other ways that we can do it, and we see that in kind of daily mindfulness activities.
So I'm going to put this out to the both of you, that innovative psychologists will innovate regardless. They will find new ways to align with their patients, to bring patients new information which they can integrate and help to change behaviour. And that the apps for them are merely extensions, just
they're tools.
They're
tools in the toolkit.
But is it the case that you can take a non-innovative psychologist, one who just goes through the menus and just say, look, there's all these new apps out there, are they really going to change that much, do you think? What training do they need to become that innovative psychologist?
I think it's kind of, you've got to do it gradually. You've got to be careful not to frighten the horses. So in trying to encourage my colleagues to start using technology, I've started with really simple apps like NovoPsych. So everybody needs to do paper and pencil tests with their clients. Well, I do. And therefore, if I can actually show you that I can put all of those on an iPad, particularly one that's this size, and that I can just hand this to my client in the waiting room, they can complete that, and I can see within seconds what their scores are on the K10, the flourishing scale, the GAD, the DAS, whatever. That is a wonderful utilisation of technology, which isn't going to frighten me. It's going to mean I've got secure data storage, I've got speed, I've got efficiency. It's going to make my life easier. So you start with a simple app, and then you move on to the ones that are less complex.
So is that, look, I'm just interested if that's actually about simplicity and about function. So the fact that something like Novo Psych, the function is something that is familiar to clinicians, and therefore they go, well, I need this anyway. Whereas I think sometimes with the more kind of creative, innovative uses of apps in sessions, is that it's a little bit scary to know when to bring these things in. Like the function isn't so clear for people. So,
but you've got to educate them over time.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that you've got to break through a barrier first. Yeah. So if you use something like that, like NovoPsych to begin with, then I think that's, maybe it's not so terrifying. And then you could perhaps introduce another app, like some of the psychoeducation apps. If I might recommend Talking Anxiety, which is a very simple app put together by the SANE organisation, which basically has two advantages. One, it doesn't require a great deal of literacy, which I think is one of the failings with a lot of these apps, but also is Australian. It's not from the United States, and it actually has Australian accents, it uses videos, and it's a sort of crash course into every aspect of anxiety that you could possibly think of. Very useful app, and something that you can use as an adjunct to the psychoeducation that all good psychologists should be doing with their clients anyway.
And I think the one that I really like in that anxiety space as well is it is American, so is Breathe to Relax. So that comes from the trauma centre in the US. But again, they've got the different modalities for people, so you can either read through or use video or use the interactive kind of diagrams. They have some practical kind of tools there. And it's probably one of the few ones that I think with multi-functionality in an app that also works. I think you were asking Liz about what we like about apps, and for me it's often simplicity, that they do one thing but they do it really well, and they do it in an aesthetically pleasing manner as well, so it looks good, you know exactly what it needs to do, it's easy to interact with, whereas sometimes the apps try to get too complex.
Yeah, so one of the ways, Michael, that I've been introducing psychologists to apps or the use of technologies in their practice to upskill a little bit has been to take what I think they're already doing in an analog format, pencil and paper tests, feedback forms, homework tasks, handouts, and then say, hey, there is another way to do this. It's exactly the same stuff or close to what you're already doing, but it's in an app form, which means when the patient has finished it, they can just email it to you. It's secure. If they're a social anxiety patient of 17 at a party, they're more likely to take out an app, a phone with an app on it, and fill in the forms there, even take a picture, than they are to take out a piece of paper and use a pen. What's a pen? And write it out. Okay. The sort of things that psychologists who are 45 and above take for granted that that's what people, and they don't do that. I don't get handouts coming back to me. So the idea for me is, let's take what people are already doing and then shift them up one small level. So there are apps that will do this. Get them used to using apps, introducing it to clients, patients, and then getting them to assess what else is out there, what else would fit in. That takes my work one step beyond what I'm already doing or what I'm being trained to do. In fact, they've actually been trained to do it. They just don't know that at this stage.
I think a lot of it's making the time to play as well.
Yes.
So, you know, I actually like exploring and seeing what's out and putting in topics into the App Store to see what's the latest, greatest thing. Talking to you too, find out what the latest, greatest thing is, but then going and playing with it. If you don't invest in actually playing around and checking out what's there, I think it's really hard to then just jump into using it in therapy or in private practice.
I mean, I think one of the really exciting things for me is that more and more psychologists seem to be developing an interest in this. When both of us run workshops now, I'm getting a lot more of the younger psychologists and the middle-aged psychologists than ever before. So I think there has been a little bit of a shift from, oh my God, this is technology, I'm really worried about it. And I think the APS has done a very good job in running those 4 webinars, which have kind of normalised, sanitised, and in a little bit way glamorised the use of this technology. But I think this is a really good example of simple use of technology is just the LiveScribe pen. Les, you're familiar with these and use them occasionally or not?
Yes, I use it a lot.
Do you want to describe it, how it works?
Well, certainly. I mean, this is another case of someone wanting to go from analog to digital in a one-step ways. So we're using an analog pen, if we just pass it over. So we have a basic analog pen that has a laser down the bottom, and the paper that you write on, so real ink comes out of it. But underneath where the nib is, there's a laser that picks up the pages, and each page in a booklet, which you can buy at Officeworks or Dick Smith. Michael is about to hold it up. There we go. So it's a normal looking booklet with lined pages on it, but in between the lined pages are tiny, tiny, tiny dots uniquely arrayed on each page, so that each page is identifiable to the laser in the pen, so that in addition to not to having the writing go to your Mac, PC, iPad or other tablet, you can have a recording that goes, an audio recording that goes to your device, and therefore you never run out of paper in a sense, you never run out of audio. And you can also go hunting down through page 5. What did the patient actually say to me at that point? So it's an interesting way to go to make the transition from real paper and pen to something like an iPad Pro, which is now good enough to, I think, write on without that awful lag that used to be on the previous models of iPads and Samsung tablets, where that you had that delayed feedback from what you're writing. And it wasn't particularly, to me it was off-putting. I didn't bother with it. I prefer to use a live scribe. I have to say that I think there's probably a lot to be said for students learning material by writing rather than simply typing. There's a little bit of data that's starting to talk about that.
There's a lot of data. Yeah, there's a very good study out of Princeton which actually looked at whether or not students remembered data better if they typed it into their computer or actually wrote it down. And there was a significant, statistically significant difference, and it's quite clear paper and pen is the best way to revise for an exam.
Sure, but let's not confuse, let's be quite specific. When we're giving homework tasks to clients, I think there's a lot to be said for having them do it on their devices, which are in their pocket, which often contain not just fields for writing in, but a reminder of how to do it. So one of my favorite apps, which I'm going to bring up on the screen now, is one called iCBT, and that's one which I use to introduce clients to cognitive therapy if they have never been exposed to it before, or have gone to my website and it says I use cognitive therapy, and I say, what is this cognitive therapy? So I use a combination of video materials, which shows a case study, and then I show a form being filled in, because the video comes from 2009, and then I say, guess what, we've got apps that can do that now. And what I'm trying to do is create excitement, A, about the approach, that we can use CBT to make changes, behavioural changes, and B, part of that work can be undertaken by an app, which you can fill in, and that contains a compendium of approaches that CBT works with, rather than giving them handouts, read this. I think we're well and truly over that sort of stage, are we not?
We are, and my equivalent, which will come up now, of iCBT is Mood Kit, which I use with all my clients to introduce them to the concepts of cognitive behavioural therapy, and they're also able to track their mood and do the homework exercises. The thing I love about Mood Kit is it actually also provides for voice entry. So that you don't have to actually get the kids to write anything down, they can just speak directly into it.
So Joe, do you think we now, modern day clinicians, we've got a twofer to do. We've got two things to do. One, we have to introduce clients to the use of the technology, and two, we have to introduce them to how to use the technology to do the clinical work. And if you can do it together, it's a 2-for-1 deal, is it not?
Yeah, it's fantastic, but it's also recognising the clients or the clinicians that maybe will never get to that. So there are going to be people that don't use technology and are never going to use technology in their rooms. And there's clients that I work with that I just go, I don't know that it's worth investing the time to work with some people, not the majority, but some people, that this is too big a leap. But yeah, absolutely, if we can get it helping us to be more effective, to use our time more effectively, which I think a lot of the tools you're talking about are excellent. And there's just so many cool creative apps out there that if we can actually harness those. I think the hardest thing is keeping up to speed. I don't know how you two do that. Like, how do you keep up to speed with what's out there when there's, I mean, you probably know better than me as well, how many apps come onto the market at the moment? Like, it used to be that you could look up mindfulness and you'd maybe find 4 or 5. Last time I looked it up, there were on the app on the Apple market, there were close to 400. So how do we keep up to speed?
Well, I guess it helps that I'm the managing director of the Young and Well CRC, and all we do is really look at the new apps. So, for example, Reach Out Breathe, which I think is one of the cleverest little apps that's come out of the Australian market. The moment I knew about it, I started tweeting out about it. But what then happens is your colleagues that you're attached to on Twitter tweet back to you either a direct response and say, have you seen this one? So ironically, it is the very technology that I'm talking about that enables me to keep up to date. And of course, their journals as well. How do you do it?
It's a very good question. I think when I run workshops, one of the things I do is to show clinicians in training in technology how to access, firstly, how to access the app. So we'll show them how to use iTunes or the Google Play Store, and how to put in a search term, and how to put in the name of an app. And then you can read about what the app is, what it's brought to do. You see the screenshots. So for me, they get an education in how to search for the app. Then I show them down the bottom, and there's some screenshots coming up now. You can see the other apps that people have chosen, or other apps like this. Very similar to Amazon. You go to Amazon, you bought a product, they'll say other people have bought this product and whatever else. So that's how they do it. Basically, social likes and dislikes and so forth. And that's how I also educate patients, as well as psychologists in training, that this is what you can do. Look at what the other apps are that other people are buying, and look at those things and see what the reviews of those are from users. And that's the other way of doing it.
There's also the really quite excellent website Beacon, which is up right now, whereby you can literally, as a clinician or a client, type in a particular condition, might be depression, anxiety, trichotillomania, and what it'll do is immediately take you to the array of evidence-based websites and or apps that are used for this particular condition. It really is quite brilliant, and full congratulations to ANU for putting that together.
Okay, so let's start to wind up. Joe, favourite app of the month, if we can put it that way. You have a favourite app that you're kind of excited about, still working through. Yeah, anything that's really kind of turning you on at the moment?
Yeah, there's an app that for me is standout in terms of evidence informed. I'd have to do a double check on whether they've actually done RCTs on it, but I can only imagine that they have. And aesthetically really beautiful to look at and to interact with, and that's Mood Meter. So that comes out of the Mood Meter comes out of the Stanford Center for Emotional Intelligence. So it's the work that a lot of psychologists would be familiar with as well, and it's really helping people to become I guess savvy in understanding and reading emotion, both in themselves and in other people as well.
Sounds like a wonderful, wonderful recommendation. Thank you, Joe. Michael?
Mine is Music Escape, which is an incredible app that we've developed, which basically you put on your phone and it analyses all the music in your particular phone, and it enables you to change your mood simply by using the music in your store. It's a free app. The RCT has just been conducted and the results are amazing. So we're very, very proud of Music Escape. Have a look at it. It's fantastic.
Excellent. And I've got two very similar apps which I'm still playing with personally.
You got two?
I've got two. They're very similar.
That's not fair.
Can't tell you about the RCTs on them. They'll be developing, but one's called Thrive and one is called Pacifica, and they're both about recording mood and feelings throughout the day. They each have something which we need to talk about another time, and these are reminders and prompts and nudges. And we have to talk about how frequently should they be. Should an app have a way for you to nominate how often it should happen? Because I've got some coming in at 8 o'clock every night and I can't change it. I have some which are American based that say, how was your Sunday evening? And it comes in at Monday morning at 4 a.m. because it's American based and I can't change it. These are some of the things I think we think about when we are thinking about our apps. So an app like that can be one that despite its great numbers and its look and feel, I might decide not to use because I can see so much interference that the patient may give up on it because they can't overcome these other roadblocks,
Yeah.
hindrances, if you like. So these are some of the things, if we were to write down the ideas of what makes for a great app, it's not just the RCTs, as I've been saying all along, or that we've been saying this in this discussion. It's the look and feel that makes a patient say, I love using this app, as we do with Focus Up Pro, because they're likely to stick with it and get long-term results rather than short-term. That was great, but put it away now.
For the next vodcast that we do, one of the issues that I'd love to discuss is the use of apps in suicide prevention. Doing a lot of very interesting work, particularly around the work of Barbara Stanley, and just check out an app called My3, which she's developed in the United States. Absolutely sensational, no pun intended.
Great.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much for our vodcast. We've come up with some great apps. There'll be some show notes I'll attach to this when it goes up on YouTube. There are some interesting webinars coming up in the next little while on rural mental health and on e-practice. I'll make a little note of those too. And we shall get together in the not too distant future. Thank you both for the podcast today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Liz.